All right, everybody, for this lesson, we are going to spend some time talking about a concept known as what's called rotoscoping. Last lesson, we talked about masks and how to use masks, and then we went into how to animate masks to make simple shapes move around. But now we want to get more detailed in how we move masks around. So I want to talk about the term rotoscoping. It refers back to a time early in animation. They were trying to create greater animation or more realistic animation, and therefore they were using actual actors. They were filming actors. So for a lot of old cartoons, they had this process by which they would film actors. The case in point, Snow White did this. They filmed an actual woman dancing around and interacting with dwarves and all that good stuff. And so they filmed that woman, and then they developed that film and hung it from a projector and projected onto a drawing table. And then they drew over the drawings, or they drew over the projected film. They drew their drawings basically frame by frame over the projected film. And this was a method or a technique called rotoscoping. And nowadays, in modern society, rotoscoping often refers to kind of drawing over film or drawing on top of film, or normally sometimes it just refers to doing things frame by frame in a meticulous kind of way to kind of make something or to create something, or in this case, to cut something out. So we're going to look at this idea of cutting out by basically potentially going frame by frame to cut out every single frame of video. But we're going to try to avoid that. And so we're going to go through some rotoscoping techniques that's commonly used in After Effects and commonly used in the visual effects world. I have this clip here of Casablanca. This is 720 by 486, so it's only in SD or traditional SD. There it is, 30 frames per second. I want to make a comp that's exactly like this. So I could go to new comp and I could make a new comp and I could type in, go to, I guess, NTSC D1 and 720 by 46 and make this 29.97. I could do all that and make this there, but I like this technique better. Down here in the corner, you'll see a create a new comp button. And this is one of the 17 other ways you can make a new comp. You can click here, you can hit Command N, or you can hit this button, and it brings up the same dialog box. But what I really want to show you is over here, one of the things you can do is you can click and drag and pull this on top of here. And this will make a new comp exactly the same settings as the footage we're working with. So the footage is 3 seconds long. It is 720 by 46. It is 29.963. So it's 30 frames per second drop frame. Boom, let it go. It made a comp exactly like that. I'll zoom in a little bit and we'll see this here. Now I want to look at this scene here of Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca here, like so. And we want to cut Humphrey Bogart out. And so to do that, we want to watch this footage and we want to just see, we'll hit play, we'll see how this footage is. And for the first maybe second and 10 frames, so this is 1 second, 10 frames, Humphrey Bogart, man, he's so stoic, he doesn't move at all. And then he moves. Okay, so he's not moving at all, just thinking. Cool, and I mean, he is still in the zone. Man, great actor. But then at around 110, 115, so let's say 115, he starts to move. And then he starts to move his head right about here. So we'll make 115 our start point, and then we'll drag over to here, and he stops around 225. So basically between 115 and 225, that's his movement there. So about 40 frames there is what he's doing. So we'd potentially have to cut out 40 frames, but let's try to avoid that. So we're going to make a mask around Humphrey Bogart. We're going to draw a mask. Hit the G key or hit the pen tool, a little robot hand there, and we're going to draw a mask. And when I draw my mask, I'll try to do this pretty decently, but I'm going to draw my mask at specific points. So I'm going to draw at the bottom of his lapel, the corner of his ear, the midpoint of his ear, and I'll pull out my Bezier handles as I need to. I'll go to the top corner of his head here, kind of wrap around this way. I can zoom in a little closer so I can see this. Maybe pull this out a little bit more. Again, I can click on this point, but again, I have to click on the last point before I continue my mask. I'll go to the center of his head, just kind of right where his nose lines up there. So center of this tuft of his head. I'll pull this out here. I'll cut around to this corner of his head. And I'm making a special note that like this point is the corner of his head. It's the right side corner of his perspective head. And then that's the center of his head, and this is the left point of his head. So this left corner. This is this side of his head here. We'll come around there. We'll come to the top of his ear. We'll come out to his ear here. And there's the bottom of his ear. I can see a little bit right here. And then the corner of his head where his head meets his jacket. I'll carve around here. Carve around this little shoulder. We'll come down a little bit lower. I'm compromising a little bit. Maybe I want to keep this little fold in his jacket. part of the style, I guess. Really make out the jacket there. And I want to make sure that when I come down, I'm going to come down here. We'll take this point down to here. We'll cut across here. I'll kind of cut into the shadow a little bit. There's the shadow of his elbow here. Shadow will be my friend a little bit. And I'll just cut him out here. And again, I don't need to make 6,000 points. I just want to make a handful of points. Now, I do want to come to the bottom of my screen. I do need to cut at the bottom of the screen. Some people think that if you just come to the bottom, like it's like a pair of scissors, you just cut out to there, and then this is already cut. It's not. So I'm going to cut around here. Cut over here, but man, look at this ashtray. This is a serious ashtray. I'm not a smoker, but man, if I was, I would want an ashtray like this. They don't make ashtrays like this anymore. And then I'll go back to the first original point and I'll cut out there. So I've cut Humphrey Bogart out like so. He's there, kind of in that scene, and he's there, and which is great. He's here. He's fantastic. The problem being is that here Humphrey Bogart moves. And so he's got some movement to him. So let's go to this first point here where he starts to move. So we're going to say at the first point here, he's moving here at 115. And now I'm going to make sure that my points, I'll hit M per mask and I'll switch back to none mode. And so here, I'm going to draw these points so that these are in the right place on his body. So we're going to go here and look inside and see. Basically, we're going to pull this to here, pull this to here, pull this here. And I know that this is the corner of his head. This is the top of his head. This is the other corner of his head. I want to keep these points. One of the tricks that I think is helpful, zooming in, but also making sure you keep the points in the same place. So this is the top of his ear. This is the middle of his ear. This point can come out this way. If I need this to be Bezier, I can Command Option, click this, and pull this Bezier. I don't need the pen tool anymore. I can just do this with a selection tool because I'm done with pen tool. This is the bottom of his ear. So here's his shape of his head here. Here's the middle of his ear, or here's the bottom of his ear. We could even hit the G key and make a middle of his ear point here, just to have it. And so there I have this cut like so. And this can be cut, click, Option, click, so it cuts out that way. So this is his ear. And I have Humphrey Bogart, whoops, don't play, sorry. I have Humphrey Bogart kind of cut out. Looks clean, looks good like there. I could maybe fix this one a little bit, give this one a little bit more pull there. And I have a clean portion of his head here. It looks pretty good there, good enough. So now that I have this is the start of the animation. I'm gonna hit M for mask, which is gonna bring up the mask path property. So M brings the mask path property. And so here, I can hit start my keyframe. So this is my first keyframe. And as we've done before, I'm going to go to this 225. I'm going to go all the way to 225 and look. And now his head's moved all the way over here. But I can sort of see the placement of where his head is. Now notice that all these points are selected. So if I were to go to the selection tool and grab one of these points, I'm going to drag all of them over, which is not what I want to do. Undo that. What I want to do is just click away. And I'm going to grab this point and put this one at the corner of his head here, which is where it was. This one at this point of his head, and this one at this corner of his head, and kind of just line these up accordingly. This was the side of his head here. We can curve this a little bit so it's a little bit like there, a little flatter against his head. We'll go this one to the top of his ear, right there, and we're going to go here to this point of his ear, like so. And we're going to come this one to here. We'll curve this out a little bit so it's a little bit flatter. This is where his jawline meets his jacket. This is the top of his ear. We can pull this one a little bit more like this. Pull this out a little bit. We'll get this to the middle of his ear here, and this to the bottom of his ear. And this point right here is just his lapel, or where his, so now he's there. And so now I have these 2 points. And so now if you look, the mask goes from here and follows along to here. But it's not perfect. Now I've gone from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation, and this would be perfect if his head was completely mechanical and he wasn't a human being. Maybe it would do a perfect move, perfect rotation from here to here, and it would just stay with it. But you can see that it's kind of getting shifty halfway. If I switch this mask from none mode to add mode, you can see that, oh, well, it kind of loses part of his head here. We got too much head here. Again, we'll switch back to none mode, and now I'm going to go halfway between. So I'm going to go about, I don't know, 115 to 2 to 205, about 205. And I'm going to adapt these points, or maybe even 210. 210 looks a little questionable. So I'm going to go here, move this to here, move this up to here, maybe straighten this out a little bit. I don't want to move the Bezier handles too much. I want to be really careful about not doing anything that's too dangerous. And so here I can cut this back, pull this back. And notice here in this kind of situation here that if I want to do this nicely, less points, more curves is sometimes better, because, you know, if I have, if I had 1,000 points wrapped around his head here, I'd have to move 1,000 points, and that becomes more difficult. So now I have from here to here, so I have this movement here, but right about here, like 225, I sort of cut off his cheek a little bit here, and I'm losing his head, so I'm going to click here and pull another keyframe. So now I have 4 keyframes. If this got like messy, I might need to put a keyframe every frame and cut this out frame by frame. I want to avoid that, so I'm putting the minimal number of keyframes. You know, is it 2? Is 2 going to get it for me? Maybe, maybe not. Is 5 going to get it for me? Is 20 going to get it for me? This looks okay from here to here. And again, maybe I can say, hey, pull this cheek out a little bit. Another point here. I'll pull this to here, to his head here. Again, I have this. I'm watching how this is going. Maybe here it starts to cut in a little bit too sharp on his cheek, so I cut another point here. I'm only adjusting the points that I need to. The ear seems fine. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we cut to here. Yeah, it's really questionable here because it really looks like it's missing the mark here. So this is the side of his head. Again, I want to keep these points in the same place on the body because I want to keep them so that they're not shifting too much. I've lost part of the ear here. I'm cutting out a little bit wide in the head. This is interlace scanning, so you can see some of the scan lines that are happening here. Got this a little bit nicer. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points. So again, I could go frame by frame. I could go to this frame and adjust it, and go to this frame, adjust it. I can go every single one of these frames. We'll do one more. Gonna keep this here. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to take this point and like shift this point way up here. You're going to see that, and you're going to see that in the cutout. And again, I'm doing this kind of quickly, but I could spend more time, more detail doing this. But I just want to cut this to here, cut this to center here. I don't want to have too much what's called chatter. Chatter is this kind of movement along the edge, kind of wiggly looking mess on the edge. His body kind of stays pretty solid, so I don't really have to worry too much about his body movement. So I'm getting a good cut here. Again, could I pull this out, make another point here? Yeah, I could do that just a little bit, but just, I don't want to go crazy. I want to have this pretty clean, so it's not wiggling out too much, and this is pretty decent. Could I do a better job? Could I go frame by frame? Sure, but let's try this here. We're going to switch the mask to add mode, and I'm going to cut this out and see how this looks. And so now we're going to see how this looks, and yeah, the head kind of moves with it. Could it be better? Yeah, it's doing okay, but maybe we'll just cheat a little bit. We'll feather, a little 4-pixel feather, a little softness. Maybe we'll even take the mask and we'll go to the mask path and say, just contract this in a little bit, choke this mask in a little bit, just so it's in 2 pixels, just so a little bit cleaner. Are we cutting off part of the ear? Yeah, maybe, but we got a kind of a, yeah, it looks bad. And you can see a little bit of wiggle. I don't really love, there's a little bit of head wiggle here at this point at the end. It just kind of comes out weirdly there because these, from here to like here, this one moved over. So this point moved a little bit. I don't want that amount of movement. So I can get this kind of clean and kind of do this. And so I want to maintain this good. So this looks okay. I mean, this is not perfect. This is not great, but this is kind of the process of what we're going to do here, of kind of doing this, going through this frame by frame and doing this to cut this out and make this work really well. And so we have this here. So now we're going to test out how this mask looks. I can do this over a color, so I can hit Command Y, you know, take like a pink color, something comp size, and then see how it looks and see how messy it is. Yeah, you'll see some of the issues there, but it's actually not that bad. You know, it could be better. Ears kind of get a little wiggly at some points, but hey, he's cut out. He's, for the better or worse, he's cut out. He sort of looks cut out. But now we're going to do a test. So I brought in this picture of the Last Supper. And so I have this picture here of the Last Supper. No, Leonardo da Vinci here. We'll just make this frame size. Bring this in here like there with the Last Supper. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to take the Last Supper and I'm going to cut a hole right here, just right in the middle of this, to cut out a Last Supper hole here. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to put Humphrey Bogart here from Casablanca into the Last Supper. So I'm going to cut a space kind of in here. I'm just going to cut a window in here, kind of like we did with the Porsche. We put the night in the Porsche. We handle that goodness there. I'm just going to cut a window here into Last Supper. I can zoom in a little bit closer. Cut that a little bit nicer and just kind of, to some degree, cut out around there. Boom, and I'm going to cut out a window. So now it's cut this so that it's just the window, and that's because the mask is in add mode. What I want to do is I want to cut out the window like I did in the Porsche. So I want to subtract this and then have Humphrey Bogart in there. And so what I'll do here is I'll take Humphrey Bogart. First I'll take the Last Supper. I'll feather this a little bit. A little bit of 3-pixel feather, just a little softness. Looks better. We'll take Humphrey Bogart, hit S for scale. We'll scale him down. And I'll make sure I'm in the selection tool, V key, and I'll just move him so he's just kind of there, just hanging out. There's a little space there with Humphrey Bogart's Last Supper. Now, the background, there is nothing going on in the background here. It's just empty, blank space. So how do I fill that in? Well, I could do this. I could say, take the Last Supper. I could duplicate it. Command D, duplicate. Boom. And then put the other version underneath. And then for the other version, I'll go to the mask and just delete the mask. Yeah, get rid of this mask. And now it's just, so now we have 3 layers. We have a background layer, Humphrey Bogart, and then a foreground with the window cut out, so it cuts into itself. So it's kind of these 3 separate layers, like so. And this is, good old-fashioned compositing. This is the bread and butter of compositing. You have a layer, you have, whatever it may be, and you'll see this in movies. You'll see, if you have a Marvel movie and you have, a background plate of some kind of background scene of New York City, and then you have Iron Man, he's cut out there. But if there's like a car in the scene cut in front of Iron Man, he's the 3D model that's been put in there, and so he looks like there. And so we can look at this and see, hey, does it look like, to some degree, Humphrey Bogart's there at the Last Supper. Hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it doing? Want to talk to you about Judas or something. I don't know. We can cut this a little bit, and I think this needs to come in a little bit this way. Cut up there, and we can see and take a look at this. But yeah, hey, it looks like he's there. I might tweak this point a little bit. Pull that a little bit out. And so we have that, and that is, for better or for worse, that is traditional rotoscoping. Now, if we had something more complicated, now this is a relatively easy scene. We have a relatively easy scene of Humphrey Bogart. If we had something a little bit more complicated, it's gonna get more difficult. So, for example, I have this clip here of let's see. I have this clip here of let's bring this clip in here. I'm gonna bring in this. Oh, I have it right here. I'm gonna bring this clip here of Saban. So I'm gonna bring in Saban. This is 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames a second. This is 9 seconds long. This is Saban here, and we're gonna just zoom out a little bit, and here's Saban. I'll turn the audio off, I don't really care, but here's Saban talking. Saban's moving his head a lot. Man, he's shifting his head all over the place. If I want to cut Saban out, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work to do to cut Saban out. And it's going to be tricky. This shot of Casablanca, really easy to do, really easy to composite, really easy to cut out. Saban is going to be a lot trickier. So I could go frame by frame and do Saban, and I could take my pen tool, G key, and I could cut Saban out. And I may go in small increments, a bit by bit. Now, the question always comes up when doing this, when doing any kind of rotoscoping work, and it really is, it's the work that people don't like to do. It's for a lot of people. I mean, some people love it, but a lot of people say, oh man, I hate rotoscoping. And you'll hear guys who work in the industry saying, oh yeah, I had to do this whole 4-minute roto job. It was really miserable. What they meant was they spent 4 minutes cutting something out frame by frame and going through that. And it's a struggle. It's a difficult thing to do. Like I said, some people really get into it, some people really love it, but for the most of us, it's just not something fun. It's just not something we enjoy doing. So it is what it is. But honestly, for a lot of the work you do, you spend a lot of time doing it. Anytime I think a director or somebody on set says something like, oh, we'll just fix it in post. What they mean by we'll fix it in post is we'll have somebody cut something out. So if there's a boom microphone that just fell into the shot, or there's a light stand that was in the shot, or some, PA extra walked into the scene in the middle of the thing, or you're making some kind of a fantasy movie or fantasy TV show, award-winning, popular, trendy TV show that had, one of your stars of the TV show drinking a Starbucks cup in your, cable fantasy TV show, in a climactic end scene, there's drinking a Starbucks cup. Yeah, that's a problem. How do you get rid of that? You rotoscope it out. You just cut out, sometimes frame by frame, and replace it with whatever you need to replace it with, covered over with something else. But there's a lot of cutting it out and moving it and cutting it out. And so it is, minus beyond, making planets explode or making special effects or making cool things or making graphics move around the screen. There's a lot of work you spend, a lot of time you spend cutting stuff out. And so the question will always come up, isn't there an easier way to do this? Isn't there a better way to cut this out? Rather than going with the pen tool and cutting out all around this and doing all that, isn't there something else we can do? Isn't there, Photoshop has the magic wand, and we know the magic wand is that thing where if you want to remove the sky, you just click on it once and it just grabs the parts of the screen that are all the same color or all the same pattern or all the same thing. And isn't there an easy way of doing that? And in After Effects, well, there is. Potentially, there's an easier way of doing that, which may be easier, maybe not be easier, but we'll talk about it. And it's something up here called the Rotobrush. And the Rotobrush says Rotobrush tool, drag over foreground, option drag over background. So let's take a look at the Rotobrush tool in detail. So this is for doing what After Effects will design to be a rotoscoped mask or some kind of a rotoscoped cutout. And so we're gonna click here, and if you try to click this tool and you click on here, it's automatically gonna tell you, hey, you can't use the Rotobrush. Use the Paint, Rotobrush, and Refine Edge tool in a layer panel. With these tools, double-click a layer to open in a new layer panel. So we've encountered this before, where you can't do this in here. It doesn't work as a thing here. What you have to do is you have to double-click and open up a layer panel. So you can click here, and you can double-click, and it opens up a separate panel. And this is kind of like this layer as a separate window. So we had the comp panel here. We accidentally double-clicked, and we're opening up a separate window called the layer panel. And so here's the layer panel, and we have the layer panel here. And it has this little green dot in the center here. You can see this little green, my cursor turned into a little green circle here. And so you have this little green circle here, like so, and you have that basically. And you can, if you hold down Command, you can drag and make this circle bigger. So you hold down Command, you can make bigger circle. That's a really big circle, or drag it smaller, make a smaller circle. So I'm holding down Command and dragging left and right and changing the size of my circle like so. So I have that control here. So we're gonna try this as an idea. And the technique here is, what I used to think you'd do is you would draw around the edge of this thing. And that's not what you do. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. What you do instead is you kind of draw anything you think is going to be a different shade. You want to find all the shades of Savon here. And so if you draw the shades of Savon, you say, hey, I'm going to draw like this part of his jacket. I'm going to hit this part of his neck and his face and maybe his ear and kind of just cover over the middle here. We'll get both his eyes here, right there. I don't know if I need a bigger brush. We'll get part of his jacket here, this little microphone, part of his shirt, maybe here, and just kind of get content here. And you let go, and then it draws this shape. And you'll see right now, it drew this little pink magenta line around here. Now I missed some things. I missed this part of his jacket. For some reason, there's a dark shade in his jacket. It just didn't like that shade. Well, I'll draw another drawing. I can make this a little smaller, Command drag a little smaller. And just draw over here and be like, yeah, grab this too. Cool, it grabbed all this. Now I have this circle around here. And now here, if I go here and I say, let's go over here. Okay, the problem is that his skin tone kind of matched the brick. And so I do have some challenges with the skin tone. So I get rid of this part. It grabbed all this brick part here. And I don't really love that as an idea. So let's hold down the Option key, the Alt key on a PC, and we'll drag and say, no, get rid of this. And then get rid of this. And then get rid of this. And then get rid of all of this. And now we get rid of all of this. Now we got rid of too much now, because then we got part of his eyebrow gone. So I'm adding that back in. Part of his cheek is gone. I'm adding that back in. Look, and actually his jacket actually matches the grout here. So I can Option click and get rid of some of that. And some of that. And we'll get rid of some of this. And we'll get rid of some of that. And so we'll clean up a little bit like so and get kind of a cleaner looking there. Cut out. I lost part of his ear, so let's get part of his ear back. And so this is some work. This is going to end up being a little bit of work to do to get this really smooth. Here I lost part of his jacket here, kind of there, and I have a relatively decent, okay cutout there. If there's some really tricky parts, you can go here and you can go to the Rotobrush tool. You can hold this down, and there's something called the Refine Edge tool. And the Refine Edge tool, I'll make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to just draw along the edge. This is like, kind of the Rotobrush on steroids. So what it does is when you draw and refine the edge, you can draw along the edge here and be like, yeah, let me grab this really smoothly. And it actually looks really closely at this edge. It says, hey, this is a really tough edge, and let's get this edge perfectly right. And it does this little kind of X-ray look at the ear and says, hey, this is really there. So if there's ever parts you see, hey, I don't know if I grabbed this right. Look, this is really tricky. It gets really confusing. Look in detail at this. You may want to use the refine edge tool. So we'll go back to the Rotobrush, and we'll look at the Rotobrush here, and we'll have this there. And so now we're looking at the Rotobrush here, and we're looking at the Rotobrush mode here. Now, in this, when I do this, I have this little kind of play path along here, and you'll see that the first point here is green. It has a little green selection. I want to actually take this green selection, and I want to make this work. I'm going to do it this way first. I'm going to look at Rotobrush. It makes an effect. I'm going to look at Rotobrush Classic because I do want to talk about this as a concern. And so here, I'm going to play this. I'm going to hit spacebar and hit play, and you're going to see it's going to generate this. So right now, what it's going to do basically is After Effects is going to basically track this. It's going to track this edge and see if it can try to see what this edge looks like. So as it tracks, you'll notice that after a couple seconds, it'll sort of lose some of this track. Oh, look, we got a corner of the wall here, and we're missing some of this, and all of a sudden, oh, this ear is gone, and now I'm getting some of the grout back here, and it's doing it. Here's other parts of the wall, and it's just not. Look at this. This is a mess here. This is a nightmare. And so this just, it's just not working. It's just not working what we want to. And here's what I used to always say. I used to say, hey, Rotobrush was good like the magic wand is good in Photoshop. If you've ever used the magic wand in Photoshop, yeah, the first time you use it, maybe it works like a charm. Future occasions, like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. It's just there's no reliability to it. And the Rotobrush was interesting, but at the end of the day, I could probably just mask out Save On better myself rather than using the Rotobrush. And the Rotobrush just wasn't up to speed. It just was like one of those things that was like, hey, in future versions, 10 years from now, maybe the Rotobrush will be great, maybe it'll be brilliant, but right now it's just not that smart. It's just not that capable and doesn't do really great stuff. And so I didn't love the Rotobrush, and I would talk a lot of trash about the Rotobrush as being inferior to what I needed to be. So let's have a conversation here. I'm gonna do the Rotobrush again. We're gonna do this again. So I'm gonna click on the Rotobrush, and again, I'm gonna highlight parts to Save On, and I'm gonna look here, and it's gonna make this Rotobrush effect that it puts in the layers. We haven't really talked about effect, but I'm gonna make sure I hit this point here this time. We're just gonna get there. Again, you do not have to draw. Sometimes just drawing down the middle, just straight to the middle would be okay. Again, we lost this lapel here, so I'm gonna grab this lapel back. I'm gonna lose some of the ear here. Actually, I wanna be at the beginning here. Let me do this, redo this here. Let me start at the very beginning here, because I think I'll like it better that way. Yeah, we'll start here at the very beginning. And again, I'll Rotobrush draw here. Make sure you get this ear, make sure you get his head, kind of just get all the parts. Anything that looks like it would be a different color or different shade or different whatever. I'll get kind of all of that and get to there. I don't want to do too much. I keep losing this lapel. Watch this. So I'm going to click add this back in. We'll option click and remove this. We'll add some of his ear back in. And then we'll remove this. We'll remove this. We'll get kind of this part of his head here. Option click and get rid of some of this. Get some of this back. Lose this little weird thing that's coming out here. Make sure I'm getting most of his head here. Make sure I'm getting most of his cheek here. Just that looks pretty good. I'll get rid of this little grout spot that looks just like the same color as his jacket. He wore like the perfect jacket for this there. Make sure I get this back in. So I'm just oops, too much, undo. Again, gotta be careful. There we go. And so I have Save On cut out. He looks like he's cut out pretty well. It looks like he's there. I'm okay with this. I feel pretty good about this, etc. And so this is Rotobrush 2.0. And about a year or two ago, After Effects, Adobe came out and said, hey, new version of After Effects version, I don't know, 2020 or something. We fixed Rotobrush. Rotobrush works now. Rotobrush is great now. It does everything you want to do. Rotobrush is amazing. And all these people were talking about Rotobrush as this new great thing that was like wonderful and fantastic. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. This sounds questionable. Not sure I believe you. And then I did this, and I've been doing this as a kind of example purposes for several classes I was teaching for a long time. And I was like, well, let's look at this Rotobrush 2.0, version 2.0, the new and improved Rotobrush. And I was like, I'm not sure. So let's go here and let's play this and let's see what happens. It's fast. It's very fast. It even caught the ear. It is clean. On my system, man, it's working like a charm. It's holding. It found the ear. It brought the ear back, cleaned it up, held it. Whoo! It's a good looking cutout. Boom, done. And that, look at that blue line. Look at that blue, or that blue line. Look at that pink line. Look at that magenta line, pinky purple line. It cut that out pretty well. Let's take a look at that. Man, cut out here. There's a little bit of noise. There's a little bit of aliasing. There's a little bit of like chatter, originariness there. You can go through here and you can play this. When you play this, you'll notice a couple things. So a couple things you'll see. When you play this, you'll see a thing on the bottom, a little bar on the bottom that says it's propagating. This is, if I do anything else to this, if I change this, it'll redraw these frames. So one of the challenges about Rotobrush is always thinking. It's always doing work. It's always thinking. It's always being like, can I make this better? Can I make this sharper? How do I feel about this thing, etc. And it's doing some work. There are some controls in the Rotobrush controls. These are effect controls. We haven't talked about effects, but we will. But these are controls. Can I feather this more? I find that the feathering here is a little bit less severe. So normally it's feathering by pixels. This is feathering by like a percentage or something. So I can feather this up to 25, maybe even 30, and you're not seeing a lot of feathering. I can crank this up to, that's a lot of feathering. That would completely, in a traditional mask, that would wipe out the entire image, but I can crank this up to 25 and get a pretty decent feather. There's some controls here to reduce the chatter. Again, that's that wiggliness there. I personally prefer to reduce the chatter. I can shift the edge in a little bit. I can crank this in and make this really small. Cut this in, but maybe just, minus 20 or whatever. Sorry, not times 20, minus 20, and cut this in here. And then I have a pretty good, and you see that little green line showed up again. And now it's just creating this, building it. I mean, he looks pretty good cut out. He's a little soft, a little smooth, but yeah, I mean, he kind of works. And there's some more controls in here. There's some more controls about how we do this and how we make this work. You'll see that green line showing up as it tries to recreate frames. It's reprocessing. It's thinking a lot. It's a really nice cutout. Maybe my feathering was a little too much. I could bring it down a little bit. Maybe my reduced chatter is a little too much. I could bring that down a little bit. And I could kind of make this work here. Once I have this, and once this is golden, this is everything I want it to be, exactly the way I want it to be, and I feel pretty good about this. One of the things I can do is in the layer panel. There's an option here. You can see the green line here that's built. So it's processing this and making this whole thing. Once it's done with everything it wants to do, and once you feel like this is pretty good, and you say, I'm just gonna wait for this to finish. And now it's doing the work, it's here. The problem with this is that every time you play this back, it's gonna wanna redo this. So if you do something like where you say, oh, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna take the shot, I'm gonna color correct it. Great, you color corrected, it's now looking at a different image. So if you applied some color correction effect, or you did something else, you put something else over it, or you played with it in some way, you resized it or something like that, it's gonna be like, hey, let me reprocess based on this new information. When you do that, when you reprocess based on some new information, it's going to have to work again. And so it's taking up a lot of RAM energy. And so the trick would be is hit this button right here, which would freeze these transformations. It would basically lock the Rotobrush propagation, which is a fancy way of saying all the work it was doing is propagating. And so we freeze the propagations, and now it's going to freeze all these frames just the way it is. And so now I can do color correction. Now I can do other effects on top of this, or whatever it may be. I can play with this a little bit because it's now freezing all these changes. So if the changes look good, and like I said here, I cut off his ear a little bit. I feel bad about it, but it's okay. But once I freeze this, I say, cool, freeze this. Now it's making this little purple line down here. And yeah, this is a better cutout. For the longest time, I used to talk a lot of trash about Rotobrush, and people used to just laugh at Rotobrush as like, yeah, it's kind of there. In the perfect circumstance, sometimes it works great. If you have a character in front of like a black background, it's great. But if you have somebody who just happens to, skin tone match the brick background, or, their jacket happens to match the grout, it's not going to work for you. It's going to be a problem. And I used to complain all the time about Rotobrush. And then, computers got smarter, Adobe got smarter, and they have this intelligent Rotobrush now. It's changed the game. I will say this, though. In doing this, should you still learn how to animate masks? Should you still learn how to rotoscope by hand? And should you still learn how to cut out there? Yeah. Rotobrush is going to work 90% of the time. There's going to be some times it's not going to do what you want it to do. There's going to be some times it's going to fail, and it's not going to work the way you want it to work, and it's not going to cut out things as nicely as you want it to, and you want to cut it out by hand. There's something about being able to do it yourself. And now you'll see here that this Rotobrush here is cut out a little bit smoother, and it's working. I mean, it's working. It's good there. We can take this. We can try this. We can say, let's take the Last Supper here. Put the Last Supper over. Boom. We will scale this up. Command-Alt-F. Scale this up a little wider. We'll put another copy right now beneath it. Command-D. Duplicate, and then again. This is sometimes what I call the Oreo cookie trick, which is where you have one layer of cookie, something in between, and then a layer on top. And then we just cut a hole in there. And we'll put Save On at the Last Supper here. Again, we'll click this, cut my window out. Boom, I'll hit M for mask. Switch my mask mode to subtract, hit F for feather. Always recommend a little feather. There's Save On's gigantic, so we're gonna take Save On. We're gonna scale you down, buddy. There you go, much smaller from there, and then we'll just move you, V for selection tool, move Save On there, so he's just kind of hanging out at the Last Supper, doing his thing. We'll kind of pull this in a little bit. Command-Alt, a little bit of a curved edge there. There's Save On at the Last Supper. Cut out. I mean, he looks good. Hey, how's it going? I'm Sivan at the Last Supper, talking to Jesus. Man. Yeah, and so that's not bad. Rotoscope has really come a long way. It really has. Really come a long way, doing a lot of good things there. You can do traditional masks. You can do traditional mask animation. It works. It works like a charm. It's a good thing. But also, now you have Rotobrush, and Rotobrush will save you a lot of time. So if you didn't shoot this in front of a green screen, that's kind of your friend. Looks pretty real. Looks pretty real. Could be better? Yeah, of course it could. But this is what we could do. We could color correct this and add some kind of blur, some kind of a noise over it. Make it really work better. Make it look like he's really there. Something, cartoon him or something. But we'll get into that when we get into effects, which we'll get into in future lessons. For now, I just want to show you that we could do this, and, this is some ideas. But practice your rotoscoping. Practice your rotoscoping. Practice going here and finding something and really cutting it out frame by frame. It takes work. It takes effort. It is learning a trade, learning a skill. All right, we'll come back with future other lessons in next time. In the meantime, keep animating, keep making cool things, and I'll see you guys around.